Welcome everybody who is going to watch this whenever you're going to watch this, whether it be soon or many years in the future. I hope what we share today can be of use and inspire you to let go of some of your baggage. And when you drop your baggage, you feel more free. So my wish today is that you get some extra sense of freedom from this experience.
Thank you for that. And welcome everybody. This is Kelly Diana and Paul Gotel. And this is the Woman Empowerment Show. Thank you guys for being here. It's a blessed day, beautiful day in Maui, Hawaii. And I have the pleasure of interviewing this amazing human being that came to my life to inspire. And somehow it's inspiring a lot more people as well. So thank you for being here. And I'm a little bit nervous, but it's okay.
It's all right, I got you. We're good.
We're good.
We're good. There's no mistakes,
Yes.
just misunderstandings.
Yes.
Okay, that's your first one. No mistakes, just misunderstandings.
Make
Write
sure
that on
you
a
write
note.
that down.
Put it on your mirror. Remember that every day. You never made a mistake. You just misunderstand what's happened.
I like that. So I'm going to share a little bit that I heard or saw on your website, and then I would love, after this, I would love for you to reframe it however you want to talk about for who are you. From what I've known so far, Paul is a life coach, an author, an inspirational speaker, an ecstatic dance DJ, a producer, and the author of the book called The Big You. Paul marks his publishing debut with the release of The Big You, a guide to self-revolution, published by Balboa Press. After achieving a very successful career as a producer and a DJ and marketing professional in the global music business before he was 30, he became disillusioned, realizing realizing that the answers he was seeking was not contained within the ideals of powers, money, and fame. So you decided to leave to the Western world behind. Tell me more about this.
So essentially, like all of us, we adopt these ideas, and I call them the three Western gods, which is time, money, and I call it sex as well, but it's basically the attraction, relationships, trying to have that juice. And so most of our decisions are around these three things. And we're trying, we think we've got a limited amount of time, so the god of time, and we're trying to make as much money as we can. Why? To get whatever we think will create attraction, so that which takes the form of sexuality, but often really ultimately what we're trying to do is gain love. And the reason we're trying to gain love is because we've bought this idea that love is limited, that love is actually, that our heart is a limited resource. And a lot of us have had experiences in our life where we've been in love or whatever, and then we go, that's it. And then we close our hearts. And when you close your heart, what happens is you stop being the channel of love that you are. And so what happens, instead of you experiencing that which you are, which is love in its outflowing, in its giving, what happens is you block it, you think you need to protect it, and then what happens is you no longer feel that. So now you're trying to get things in the outside world, which ultimately you're trying to acquire appreciation, gratitude, approval, and pretty much everything you do is about that. But ultimately it's because it got broken. So I had a situation in my life where it was actually my mum who left when I was relatively young, 11 years old, and I basically, in the world speak, had my heart broken. And so what happened is I went into the world trying to get relationships, engagements, marriages, etc., trying to be loved again, trying to be whatever it was that had that. But ultimately, it wasn't love. It was a trade game I was playing. So I would find people who needed stuff. I would give them whatever they needed. So I became a really very high-level people pleaser. And then they, in turn, would say they love me. But really, it was this trade game. And I was not thinking of being authentic. I was thinking of being whatever it is that would get me that approval. And so part of that was this dynamic in the world of actually trying to prove to everybody that I had value. So I had a passion in music, and so I went and created a music business. I had labels, studios, I remixed, I produced, I traveled the world, etc., etc. A dream life, for a 20-year-old. I made a lot of money. But ultimately, there was this point where I recognized where I was in this game, and if I didn't get number one, then it was a failure. So I had risen to the top of the music industry in the UK, and if I didn't achieve number one, it was a bad week, which is just ridiculous, where basically, unless you win every week, you feel like you're less than. So this is what happens when you're playing this game of approval, whether it be money, success, a business, in a relationship. It's almost like every night you go to sleep, it clears, and the next day you have to do the same again, but better, because now yesterday's success feels normal. So we get normalized. It's like you get a new car, and then after you get a new car, and then suddenly you're like 2 months, 3 months later, it's just a car. And people go, "Oh, what a great car," and you're like, "Oh, yeah, I suppose so." Or, "What a great house," and you're like, "Well, yeah, I suppose so." But you've got normalized, and so you're always trying to push, and that pushing exhausts you. And so I recognized this, and what happened is I basically had a breakdown in my early 30s. And I was, at the time, I was actually doing so well. I was on the front cover of the magazine Music Week for my business acumen and the fact I was having all these roles and such success. But secretly, I felt the pressure. I'd created this persona, and I was under this pressure. And I basically had a breakdown, and I came out of that, and the details of that, more details, etc., what happened is in the start of my book, is exactly how did you end up doing this. But essentially, I came out of that, and I let go. I got divorced. I sold my business. I sold my home, and I went off around the world with a backpack, looking for answers. And I had a number of very surreal things happen to me that made me think either I'm crazy, I should go to a loony bin in England and say it. My wife at the time actually wanted, she was like, "I think we're going to need to get you committed," or what we think about the world and how we think the world functions is wrong. And so it was like, either I'm crazy or there's some truth here. And so I went off, and that ended up being a 5-year journey of discovery. And I went to over 2,000 sacred sites. I lived with Bedouins. I lived with Aborigines. I lived with monks in Tibet. And I became a firewalking teacher. I became a Reiki teacher. Many, many things. Went on top of a pyramid, underneath a pyramid, Lots and lots of detail. But essentially, I was searching to really discover what in my creation of my personality, my identity, was actually false. And that I was defending and proud of this being, but this being inside was trapped. My heart's expression, my joy, my silliness, my creativity, my spontaneity. Those things we contain under the idea of being an adult and doing things right. And I recognized that, and I went through this journey. And so that's basically what happened as far as that question.
That is a loaded answer.
Yes, exactly.
But I love it. Thank you for the details. And that's exactly why we're here, to self-discovery, not only from your story, but from the stories of so many people that may have been going through a similar situation, like myself, including me as well, of wanting to understand more of what it is in the inside. So that leads to my second question. And my question is, in your book, The Big You explore the themes of revolution. Could you share how this concept can empower individuals, particularly women, to transform their lives?
Absolutely. So the concept of revolution, in that sense, is what came to me. What I recognized is that I was in a state of revolution. It's like on the outside, and this can happen, male or female. I mean, I know your audience is primarily female, but
both.
The
Yes,
context
including.
is that everything that I share is from a place, if you're human, if you're a human and you have consciousness experiencing life through this form called humanity, then it applies to you. Mm-hmm. So although I could go into detail about male and female and those dynamics, ultimately, most of what I share is before that, there's this context of consciousness acting in a human body. So in that context, what happens is that we come in and we are authentic. We don't have an agenda. So without an agenda, there's no reason to be inauthentic. Then what happens is that we adopt the programming of good and bad. So the ideology around anybody who's existed is that there's good and there's bad, right and wrong, good and evil.
Light and dark.
And what I understood was that it's very simple. We call gain good and loss bad, with the ultimate bad being the loss of life. So if someone dies and if someone kills someone, we call that evil because it's the taking away of life. But ultimately, what I recognized is that this dynamic means that in every moment, like a child doesn't have this concept, it learns this concept. It comes in, it's authentically expressing, it's a conduit for source, God, universe, but ultimately love to come through. And it's later on that it learns this idea of acquisition, because ultimately we are actually here to not get anything, we're here to give everything. We're here to be a conduit for source to express through us, and what we see before us is the reflection of that. But when we switch that and we start to try and acquire something, what happens is our authenticity comes out, and then we adjust it, we manipulate to get something.
An outcome.
Or
Personal interest.
yes, or we manipulate it to try and not lose something. And so that on that premise, we all think good is gain, bad is loss. And so in every moment, here's your authentic expression, and then there's like a border control. And that the border control is like, hang on, if we change this, we could get something, money, approval, an accolade, material thing, whatever it is. And that will make us more value, make us worth more. But ultimately, that's an inside job. In other words, we're thinking that we will have more value with those things. But what we're saying in that, and what, pretty much everybody, if you're a human, is we're saying then what we are is not enough. So we kind of have this concept that we're not enough and we have to acquire to be enough, to actually add to ourselves.
But instead we may be actually taken away of what it really
Well,
is.
exactly. Because if what you are, like, we don't look at a baby and say that baby's not enough. We say, wow, look at the brightness, the shining, the coming through, right? But it's only when
no limited to the expression.
Yeah. But it's only when we block our expression that we then not feel enough, because here's your expression coming through. So you imagine you're shining, and then there's here's your border control going, hang on, I'm only going to let through that which gets me something, or that which stops me losing something. And so we're constantly every day fighting ourselves, and this is why we exhaust ourselves, and this is why we don't feel enough, because we're actually so we then try and get. But the thing is, everything that you get, if you adjust yourself to get it, so if you like his authenticity, which doesn't have an agenda, and then the agenda comes in and you adjust it, you become this, you get something, but it matches who you've become, not who you are. So everything that you get, ultimately, and we've all felt this, money, job, person in your life, eventually at some point you recognize that it costs you something. It cost you something, and actually, instead of it being something that added to you, it actually polluted you. So in that context, gain actually is an act of pollution on the basis of saying, I'm not enough, but if I add this, I will have more value. And then on the other side of that, loss, we think, oh, I've gained this thing, I've invested my authenticity in it, I don't want to lose it. But what happens is that when something wants to move away, it starts to move away, we hold tight. But actually, and then that costs us, so we become even more inauthentic to keep something. And we've all been in relationships or jobs or situations where to retain the thing, we become further and further inauthentic until finally we go, I can't do this job, I can't do this relationship, or whatever it is.
Stress happens and things, right?
Yeah, and you're just like, I can't do it anymore because you have done that. So the idea, so then in that context, anything that you could lose is actually obviously not you, because you cannot lose what you are, you could only lose what you're not. So all loss is actually an act of purification, and all gain in the context of adjusting who you are to get it is an act of pollution. So rather than it being good gain, bad loss, what I now understand, it's good loss, bad gain.
Good loss, can you repeat that?
Good loss, bad gain. So a good day, when something moves away from you, that's a good day. That's an act of purification. That's something you recognize you are holding on to, and you have, so instead of going, holding on and grasping, you have an open hand, and you let things, what comes, let come, what stays, let stay, what goes, let go. You don't do any act to try and keep something. You don't adjust your authenticity to keep something. And we have this idea that that means, well,
Scary.
it's scary because we recognize that most of the things we've got, we betrayed ourselves to get. We were inauthentic to get. And they're only there as long as we keep behaving. Like, I don't know if any of you listening have been in a relationship and you're constantly adjusting yourself and watching what the other wants to try and make sure you don't upset them, don't trigger them, don't piss them off. And then you start recognizing, wow, they're only here because I'm being the perfect thing that they want, not who I am. And then you don't feel loved. You don't feel loved because you know you're not being yourself. And so even when people say to you, I love you, you go, I'm not really being myself, so you don't know who I am. I'm not being someone to love.
You're living the illusion that was created upon their needs.
Yeah, for you to have to retain them.
To have the love, right?
And so when you switch this, you start seeing. So when you try to gain in life, it's like insistence. You're trying to get something. You're like, it's like you're leaning it. You're trying to get it, and you go, oh, lean back, and you let your hand back. And then when you're trying to avoid something in life, you lean in, because what you're always trying to, avoidance is trying to not lose something, and insistence is trying to get something. So when you're in insistence, you lean back, and when you're in avoidance, you lean in. Because when you're in avoidance, you're trying not to lose something, you lean in and open your hand and let the thing, let whatever it is leave. Because unless you have space in your life, that which now matches who you are can't arrive.
Right.
And so, and if you're in grief, if in other words, if somebody's left you or you've lost a job or whatever, and you're still in grief and you haven't revealed it and let it go and processed the grief, then what happens is you're still like this. It's the new thing's waiting there, going, hey, there's an upgrade waiting.
There's no space.
There's no space.
And
so,
how do you release grief?
How do you release grief? That's a much bigger conversation, but essentially, you recognize that grief is gratitude. Grief is gratitude for for the manifestation that came to you and what it gave you, and the release of it, because the release of it, if something leaves you, it's always because an upgrade is coming. And when I say upgrade, I don't mean the person is better than the person before. I mean the person or the place or the thing that comes is more aligned to who you are authentically as to who you were. So you never look at someone and go, oh, it was them and and point the finger, like a lot of us leave a relationship and say that person wasn't good enough. You're just going to bump into that, because if you avoid something,
it will happen again.
You're just going to, you're going to.
It could happen as
well.
But
if you grieving is actually it's the experience of releasing. And the end of grief is like this gratitude of, wow, that was so beautiful. And then, because if you've loved something, you continue to love it. So if it was a trade and the trade doesn't work anymore, right? You're paying someone to do some job and then they stop doing it and you stop paying them. That's a trade. So if you're in a relationship where you're pretending to be something, they're pretending to be something, and then that agreement doesn't work anymore and you both aren't being real and you split, fine. But if you really have loved someone, because my definition of love is the absence of condition.
The absence of condition.
Right? So I'll say that again. So love is the absence of condition. So if you say you are loving something, but you have a condition, then it's not love, it's a trade. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying recognize that. And then if it is a trade, make sure you get the agreement out. And you can love someone and also have a trade agreement of how you live together, who pays whatever bills, who does whichever tasks, etc. So you can have agreements within love, but the love itself isn't based on the agreements. And there's a lot of people, even in the lover corner, there's 4 corners to a relationship: lover, friend, partner, and a colleague.
Can we repeat that? Lover,
friend, partner, colleague. And I say it's like you want a passionate lover, a caring friend, a supportive partner, and an inspiring colleague. And so a relationship isn't one thing, it's four things that have to be solid in themselves to create, let's say, the roof like this, which is the relationship. And if you don't take care, or a lot of people aren't aware of that, so a lot of people get together as lovers, but they haven't worked on their partnership, or they actually are in mistrust. They're jealous. They think their partner's going to like be unfaithful unless they watch them. Obviously, that means their friendship corner, which is based on trust, isn't worked on. You know, so you really have to own the fact that whatever is happening on the outside is actually a reflection of your fears on the inside, and the fears are around, I don't want to lose something, and I will be inauthentic not to lose that. So the revolution is when you finally get this, you look in the mirror, as you were sharing with me earlier, and you find yourself revolting. When I say this to people, they kind of like, what? Did he insult me? Because there's the act of revolution. So I am in the act of revolting. I'm revolting. But then there's the looking at yourself and going, wow, I find myself revolting. And you could be super beautiful or successful. But if it's cost you authenticity, if you've been betrayed yourself to get that, then ultimately it doesn't matter how much success, how many people, how many followers, how much money, you will, as like a lot of famous people have ended up taking their lives through drugs or whatever. It's because it doesn't land. If you're not you to get all those accolades, you know you're playing this game.
The game.
Like, you know, you're playing the Emperor's New Clothes, and you know it, and everybody else.
Feeding another avatar.
Yeah.
That's not really you.
And so you ultimately, doesn't matter how much you get, it's never really is enough.
Right.
Because the exterior isn't about to give you anything. You're not here to get anything. You're here to give everything. You're here to clear this conduit and then be a channel for love. You experience love as you express it, not, you can't actually get love, because to get love would mean you're not love. Right?
And we are
So you're love.
That makes sense.
You're not a person loving, you are love. You're the witness of the love that you are. So as it passes through you, and we all know this, right? If you've loved a person or a child or a pet or, you know, a sunset, in those moments, time disappears, right? You know, like acquisition disappears. You are in complete appreciation. You're like, I love this. And it feels amazing. We've all, you know, in the start of relationships, a lot of us go, I'm in love. It's so cool. Everything looks brighter. Everything looks more exciting. You're more positive, you know. So the point is how can you live that? Well, you stop trying to avoid loss, and you stop trying to do acquisition, and you stop putting, and you become this conduit, and because everything you lose is actually a boulder out of the river of love that's coming through you. So you've built all these boulders, and you've restricted your love flowing out. So that's why you think, I need to get it. And all of this started is because when we were younger, we were told, you know, we weren't enough, right? We were told we were too much, right? Most of us, if we've been a child, like, you're too loud, too noisy, go to bed, be quiet. And so we take on this thing of too much. But another way of saying too much is that we are more than enough. So a lot of modern spirituality talks about you're enough. But I disagree. If you're just enough, if I was to share with you some sweets, say I was with kids at school, and I'm like, hey, I've got some sweets. Do you want some? And you go, sure. And I've only got 4. And what have you got? Oh, I'll take some of those and I'll give you those. And that's how trade happens. But if you have an overabundance, if you're more than enough, if I've got a bag of sweets and it's huge, and you're like, here, take a handful. Yeah. I'm like, no, my mum gave me, I've got more than enough, please. And so the truth is that we're more than enough. And we're here to share that. And when we restrict that, so we're this like spring, right?
Like a waterfall.
And it's always coming out. And either you suppress it or you express it. And so every person you meet, it's like, what can I give to this person? What can I give to this person? The highest experience of joy.
Would you like some flowers?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The high experience of joy is the expression of love, is the giving. And the act of love is the giving of yourself in that sense. And you know when you're doing it because you feel fulfilled in the action. So if you're doing things and you feel that people didn't give you, like, weren't appreciative or didn't recognize your love, or you wasted your love, I'm sorry to say, that's not love. That is a trade. and the trade didn't happen how you thought it was. So that's why you become irritated or annoyed and blame the other person. But ultimately, you know when you're in expression of love because you become this conduit, that you open the floodgates from within you, and you not only does it land, but you're not attached to it landing. You have no agenda. I call it the 3 R's: no reward, no requirement, no result.
No reward, no requirement, no result.
So if you have a reward, requirement, or result, that's a trade. That's an agenda. It's okay, but it's not love.
It's a trade
Yeah?
in that sense.
It's an agenda.
It's an
So,
agenda.
and in the minute you have an agenda, you will adjust your authenticity to either not lose or to gain. So when you're coming from love, you are actually fulfilling, and you get to experience. You imagine the streams coming out of you, and you feel it as it's coming through you.